We can hear you, Claire.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our weekly Q&A. So I'm TJ, specialist in highly gifted education with Passend Education, and I'm on a mission to make gifted kids more happy, autonomous, and successful. And this week, we're going to be talking about project-based learning in our series on how our actual curriculum looks like. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of history around project-based learning. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the term, but I'll help define it a little bit, as well as actually show you where we implement it in our curriculum and what kind of impact we're looking for with the kids. So if you have any questions in the meantime, please put them in chat. I'm more than happy to answer questions as they come in. And if need be, I believe there's a few questions from our questionnaire as well that I'll be diving into, particularly a little bit in the idea of like how can we use project-based learning to help with these particular parents. So let's start off with a little bit of history, or a little bit, probably first with a definition. So what is project-based learning? Some of you have probably heard of project-based learning and problem-based learning, and they look very similar, but they're not quite the same. The idea with project-based learning is that you give kids a project to do, as the name it says, and often without a lot of help, like particularly without a lot of explanation, sometimes even without any kind of lecture at all. And it tends to be like and this is definitely more the case with problem-based learning, right? So project-based learning normally is a more simpler version of problem-based learning. So we'll explain project-based learning. What does that look like? You've probably seen some of your kids do things like this, things like I don't know, like a little science fair project where they have to come up with an idea. They have to work it all out. They have to figure out, okay, what do I want to present? They might need to do an experiment. Like depending on what age group the kids are, these could be things like setting up a little lemonade stand or a little shop. And basically, together with the whole class, generally speaking, they will get like a particular kind of objective that they have to achieve, a certain number of time that they can achieve it in. Very often they get specific resources, and that will then allow these kids to finalize the project. Other versions of these are making things like posters or writing a little novel. So there's lots of variations of project-based learning, but it's essentially the natural progression from learning other basic skills in school that then get applied in some kind of form. So that is project-based learning. Problem-based learning is a project, generally speaking, but even more open-ended. So generally speaking, what they say is that, okay, you need to solve this particular problem, and that could be very big. You could say, like, try to solve a social problem and then find one yourself. Or it could be, for example, right, we want to build a water tower and we want to find out with this much materials what the most ideal shape is to store water in. And that is essentially, again, like a sort of a carte blanche to go, okay, you can figure out your own ways to solve that problem, but you will have to really be cognitive of like some limitations and such. Now, the very first form of advocacy for project-based learning is by long deceased, of course, like a certain John Dewey, who is a philosopher, like later on more a psychologist in education specifically, who in 1899 already started advocating for the idea that schooling itself and education should move more and more towards real-time application. So rather than sit in a class and just recite what the teacher is saying, he said, you should really be letting these kids do things that they want to do. And he did quite a bit of research into what the impact of this is, and he found some really strong connections between the will to want to learn things and the ability to do it in a kind of project. And I mean, you can see that like even back then, when schooling in its like how it's sort of in its current form was started to really take shape as something as a public good. Was already being considered, but it took quite a long time before we really started to implement that fully. Now, the next person, we've heard of Joseph Renzulli before. If you don't know, Joseph Renzulli has also been quite instrumental in talking about like the triangle of giftedness, effectively. So he had creativity and like ability and like social situations that would allow you to find the intersection of giftedness in here. So that was where he started, but he also founded something very specifically called the SEM. And this is the school enrichment model. The school enrichment model is effectively the culmination of all of the work that he's done in gifted education around how schools should identify gifted kids, work with gifted kids, and how the school should present work that allows kids to go deeper. Though the enrichment model wasn't just focused on gifted kids, but it basically was intended to help gifted kids and anybody that would be on that threshold. And the idea of enrichment, which is still practiced by a lot of parents, is still there, right? So he's been one of the first to sort of coin that as like an educational kind of thing. And he specifically said that there were three types of enrichment. So the first one, type one, is exploring. Like, so this is all about things like, okay, like where can you find the information? There are a lot of enrichment products like, okay, go to the library, go find out some more information about this. Or like nowadays we can do things like watch videos, or we can visit museums. And whilst these are not really creative endeavors, they are really intended to deepen the understanding and the interest with these kids. And that is basically a type one enrichment. Type two enrichment is all about application, right? So basically what he said is like, can we find something that we can physically do with whatever we're learning in school that actually makes sense? So how do we tie it to things that are actually happening in the real world? So think things like, okay, like go to a museum first to explore the enrichment, then say, okay, can you find a particular piece that was written about like the economy? Can you then bring that back, and can you write some kind of paper on it to tell us like what you think of this? And that is relatively focused on still not really adding a lot of extra information as such, but just thinking about like, how can I take the things that I've already learned and apply them in a meaningful way? He also called this like process skills. So this is really where we often see a bit of a connection between, again, what a school does and what is expected in the workplace. Type 3 enrichment is a little bit more special though, and it was quite wide. So what he called it was independent investigations and real products. So the important in this is like real products is, can you make something that you choose to do, very open-ended, do investigation on without any kind of limitations on what the teachers want to do, like no guardrails whatsoever, except for like physical limitation in terms of money and things like that. But like no direct input from the teacher saying, oh, you're not allowed to do this, right? It's very open. And then how do you apply that in real form? And that could be things like selling stuff and you name it. So that is Renzulli. This is roughly around the 1990s where he started talking about this, and was quite considered quite the baseline model that specifically in the US was being used to ensure that gifted and talented education was well-meaning and fitting for what the kids would need. Working on that and going a bit deeper later on is Joyce van Tassel-Baxa. So this is rounded about like 1990s to 2010s roughly. Like I believe her model is sort of more about the 2000s, but she took a little bit more of a psychology approach to things. So what she said is that, okay, there's particular needs that gifted kids in particular have that we have to really address. And the important one that she said is that we need to have advanced content, right? So whatever we present has to be more advanced than what they would normally get. So that was a core tenet of her model that she was bringing in. And then she said, the next step, in order to cement this, we need process plus inquiry. And what she means with that is that we should allow the kids to basically ask questions that go a little bit deeper and so on. Then what she said is like it needs to solve real problems. And this is a need that a lot of gifted kids have, where they feel like things have to be fair, equal, meaningful. There's a lot of gifted kids I work with that say like, I don't understand why I'm here. I don't see the point. So like when you bring in a project that actually solves a problem, you can see that these kids really, really latch onto it and want to do more stuff with it. And then with that, it has to be for real people. So authentic, like problems, right? So it's problems that are real, and they have to be for real people. Like, so whatever products you make has to apply to somebody. Now there is some leeway with this, because like a real product for real people could be something that is for a university, and for some of us, stuff that comes out of universities doesn't always feel like it's real, but in this particular setting it does actually apply. Now, I'm gonna talk a little bit more about like what we use with this, because like Joyce and Joseph basically were very clear that like when it comes to this, like the normal school sort of struggles providing this for our gifted kids. And there's been quite a lot of work recently, particularly in the UK, around the idea that like gifted and talented education should not be separate as such. One of the reasons for that is that some people say it's elitist, right? So there's an unfortunate side effect from how you select gifted kids, that the people that have access to more tests and kind of support are more likely to be found, right? So there's a bit of a almost natural bias towards people from well-to-do families and backgrounds. And then there's also a lot of cultural challenges around like particular cultures in the West that are imported cultures from other places, where um, like trying to be the smartest around you isn't really necessarily promoted as such. Now, there's differences in all kinds of cultures. Like traditionally, Chinese cultures have been very strong about like learning and so on, and like having scholars as part of your family was such a big part of doing well. That like when you see like Chinese migrants or Asian migrants for that matter, because they all have very similar kind of basis, that they actually do focus a lot on that progression. So with those immigrants in particular in UK and the US, we saw like even a higher acceptance into the gifted and talented programs for that matter. Not because they're smarter per se, but just because the culture sort of selects for that easier. Like, and there is some distinct cultures from North Africa, for example, where that is really tough. And in the Netherlands, where my mom has been setting up centers and stuff, it's been really difficult for her to help, particularly these they're called Moroccan. Like we have a lot of migrants from Morocco in the Netherlands, and they were like kind of not purposely ignored, but they didn't get the help that they needed, and that is changing very rapidly, luckily. But it's created a bit of a narrative where gifted and talented programs are very elitist, and that is, I believe, no longer true. But that created a shift towards saying, okay, we should just actually be able to do any kind of enrichment and any kind of differentiation in a normal classroom. And there's been quite a lot of scientific studies recently that show that this is categorically just not true, right? So you need a little bit. You don't need to have like full on differentiated learning, where we like where you say we take the kids into a boarding school, and that's the only way we can help give the kids at all. But the golden middle path is actually pulling them out for a couple of hours a week, and then working with them on things that matter. And this is where project-based learning is really great, because project-based learning doesn't really assume anything about the level of ability kids have. So when you run project-based learning and problem-based learning modules, the way it differentiates is natural, and it feels kind of good. So the kids will decide what level of difficulty they want to work with, and that also does something else, which is really really nice. Today, most teachers don't have enough time to actually look at our kids in classrooms. They have to stand in front of 24 to 30 kids. They're expected to run a curriculum on rails, and everybody has to finish this at the same time. No matter that some of them might find it too hard, no matter that some of them find it too easy, and therefore there's this urge to sort of like speak. And what that creates is very little connection with the teachers. There's some teachers that can do this quite well, still involve the class, they're very energetic, they're good presenters, but they're still like, you can't really give that one-on-one kind of thing. Whereas when you do project-based learning, something really magical happens, and the kids at some point start working on their own. And when they do, you can look over their shoulder and you can see what they're up to, and then you can help them as they need it. And in some cases, helping them doesn't mean like giving them an answer. And most of the time, actually, that's totally not what we do. We point towards resources that they might need, and potentially to other things that they need to think of. But I'll go into a little bit of detail of what that could look like when it comes to actual project-based learning like we do it. So I want to come back to the Maslow and Bloom theory again. For those that weren't here last week or the week before that, the way we work in Passend Education is that we truly believe that in order for us to be able to work on any of the learning skills that kids need to work, the Maslow hierarchy of needs needs to be in order, right? So the majority of the kids that we work with in primary struggle with this love and belonging thing. So what happens, again, for those that weren't here last time, is that with this particular hierarchy is that Maslow says that you cannot work on any of the higher ranks if the other ranks are not in order, right? So physiological needs are the need to eat, for example. So if kids are hungry, they will not listen to us. And most teachers that I work with know this. Yet you'll find that a lot of kids, like, they have to eat at a specific time, right? Even though we know that, like, if you're technically not hungry, eating isn't good, and if you're hungry, not eating isn't good, right? So like there's things that we do in schools where we say, oh, this has to be regulated, like break times are then and then, and that's all because the idea is we have to be in class all at the same time, and we have to all be doing the same stuff. And like kids will get used to that, and eventually they can get into a rhythm, and we can browbeat them into this technically. Obviously, the safety needs are pretty self-explanatory. There's lots of reasons why we have a lot of pastoral but safety needs are also things like feeling okay enough to be able to go home and talk about stuff that they struggle with, right? So some of this stuff the school needs to provide, some of this comes from the parents, but the love and belonging part, which is, do I belong to a group that trusts me enough and that I trust enough to share and ideas with, but also adjust my my way of thinking and my behaviors too, right? So we see a lot of people struggle here. So when we work with love and belonging, we say actually it is a really important part of happiness, right? So being happy, are the kids happy? And we know that in order for kids to be happy, they need well-being. They need, sorry, I mean this right. So they need well-being, they need agency, and they need responsibility. So responsibility and agency, like well-being makes it's very easy to understand. They need to be healthy, they need to be feeling okay, they need to be mentally fine, and that's normally where a lot of stuff stops. Agency is all about, do the kids have the ability to make meaningful choices? And responsibility is the idea that, like, what I do matters, right? The opposites of agency and responsibility means no choice. It means nobody cares what I'm doing. And you can already see that if you don't have these feelings, you'll feel not happy. Now, why do I bring this up? Because when we do projects in Passend Education, agency and responsibility is a really big part of that. And you could argue that, kids get homework, that's their responsibility, but that's not really how responsibility works. even though as parents you would love it to be like that. But a responsibility is technically not a responsibility until somebody's chosen to do that task. And like everything in our society is built around that idea. Like most of you are working professionals. If you hire somebody in your job and you basically hire them to be a janitor to sweep the hallway, and if you then decide, you know what, I have this big report that needs to be done, right? If that report is not done by the end of tonight, I'm going to lose $2 million. And I'm going to give that to the, because I'm running out of time, I'm just going to throw it at the janitor and say, look, this is now your problem, right? We're going to get a massive fine if we don't do it. You better go. If you were to do this, and it's a bit of an absurd situation, and the IRS or whatever equivalent LHDN comes and knocks on the door and goes like, that report isn't done. And you say, yeah, I gave it to this guy to do. It was his responsibility because I gave it to him. I can guarantee you, as somebody in a higher up position, you would still be in trouble. That responsibility would not be actually taken by that person. And even if that person would have said, yes, I'll take that responsibility, that still doesn't mean that responsibility would be there. So responsibility isn't like something you throw at people. Responsibility should be a choice, and it should be accompanied with a level of understanding about the choice that needs to be made, right? So if the kids don't really understand what they're choosing to do, then even though they say, I'm going to choose my responsibility, we shouldn't really be able to blame them for it. Right? So how do we get to that stage? Like because taking responsibility, the phrase is there, taking responsibility is really not easy if you have no clue what you're doing. Right. And then if responsibility comes with consequences, so like what we tend to see with a lot of kids that are struggling with this love and belonging part, is that the parents or the school is sort of telling them you have a responsibility to take care of your grades. And then they don't really understand what it is that they're dealing with. And then they shut down, right? They go like, I don't know what to do. They try to work very hard. Now, some kids like do rise to the occasion. That is definitely true. And in a sense, school's not out to just throw out like responsibility willy-nilly to every kid and sort of saying like, yeah, it's your problem, right? The kind of the goal is to say, okay, we're going to give them responsibilities that are roughly at the level that we expect them to be at that particular age, right? So that is why curriculums are built this way, and that's sort of built like, again, like this curve. The IQ bell curve is an equivalent of this. So as long as a school sits within these two extremes, and this is where your IQ of 130 and this is where your IQ of 85 sits. As long as the school sits within this, it basically hits 95% of the population, and it could say we're doing our job, right? So that's why the banners that you see is like, oh, 90% of our kids get an A star or like things like that. But it doesn't really take into consideration that it often, a lot of schools that I've run into will say, oh, if your IQ is that low, because this is where you get into special education needs territory, we don't take kids that have this issue. And I've had the exact same argument used on the other side. We don't take kids on the other end, right? So this is where like school sort of fails our gifted kids. And what happens with a lot of kids that I work with is that they're so scared to make these kind of decisions, they really freeze up. So when we do project-based learning with choices and things like that, what we do is we help them make choices. So we teach them agency and we teach them responsibility. And this can be tough for some parents to see, because like if you give kids that have never really taken agency in this, or they have never really accepted responsibility properly, they often don't really succeed at their first projects. So we see almost all of our first projects not succeed. And that is actually kind of okay, right? Because when you look at it, when it comes to science and when it comes to learning things on a job, the first attempts never really work. If I would take any one of you and I would say, you know what, you guys are going to become pottery like fires from now on. And here's some clay, and I want you to make some pots. Your first pot isn't going to look like anything useful, and unless you get like a little bit of practice, like figuring it out, like it will take a while before you probably produce something useful. And so in traditional trades, we assumed that the first things that people were going to do were going to go completely wrong. But what we tend to see with a lot of projects in schools is that they're so curated that kids don't fail them, right? Like not even in year one or two. We don't, like, a lot of kids don't fail at their project, and this is one thing I see a lot of in Malaysian local schools and local Chinese schools, for example, is that kids get their work back, and then they have to erase the mistakes they made, and they have to like do corrections and then hand it back in, and they have to do this with a lot of stuff, but they don't have to do it with the project works that they do. So if they get like a bit of art that they have to do, because like the schools like do get told by the government that they have to do some project work, but those never get the same kind of scrutiny in a way in school. And the way it gets treated is that they often don't even get graded. So what happens is the kids think it's not really important. Right. And then when I look at like particularly in schools where agency is a bit lacking, the stuff is everybody just builds the same thing. It has to be done exactly the same way. So to me, that is not really a project at that point. It is just a little bit of busy work, right? So that's the love and belonging bit. So we know that we can't work on any of the stuff in Bloom's taxonomy if we are not first feeling okay and happy, right? So if we have happy here, that's this threshold. We can only start working on Bloom's if we are here, which we call autonomy. Okay, so when we talk about autonomy, we're talking about like particular kind of skills to learn. Now, Bloom's taxonomy is also a pyramid. It says that in order for you to really learn new things, you have to first remember something, which means you have to tell somebody something. This is where lectures come in. Then there is like understanding. So this is where there's some questions from the teacher that you answer. Maybe you get a little bit of coursework that you have to do, and it's just to check whether you understood the lecture that was done. So this is the first like tier, first order of thinking. This is tier 1 level order of thinking. And then the good schools basically go, okay, how do we apply this? Now, applying the very basic form of how do we apply that information is generally speaking through a test or like an exam or something like that. And in some cases, like some schools will do a little project with it, like a little experiment, you name it. And then we ask people to look at it. So that's the analyzing thing. But with level tier order of thinking here. So analyzing something means only looking at the stuff that is being presented. There's no real thinking outside of the box with this yet. And applying it basically means practice, right? So most schools traditionally would like get stuck in this. The next two, and this is the third order level of thinking, is evaluate and create. So evaluation is about looking about the stuff that you've done and then thinking about hypothetical situations that could happen if I were to take it to another level. So this is where you're starting to show some real mastery of things. But what is really interesting about these last two levels in Bloom's taxonomy is actually at this stage, we really start using the deeper areas of our brain. It's like we're making more connections. The way I sometimes describe this to kids when I'm teaching them how to get ready for exams is that in level 1 thinking, it's like you're putting little bits of information in your brain, like stars, like little bits of stars. And this is a very good analogy of like how information actually gets stored in our brain. So I'm just listening, I'm getting little points of information, and rote learning traditionally used to be like, as long as we keep repeating that and we have like millions and millions of stars in there, if I ever need to retrieve a little bit of information, I just have to shoot, and the chance that I'll hit like one of the stars is high because I put millions of them in there. But it's kind of boring, it's kind of repetitive, and actually the stars fade over time because there is no real connection in your brain towards anything. When we go to the second order of thinking, it's like these stars basically start becoming almost like little constellations, right? So And constellations are patterns. With constellations, you can remember big parts of what is quite a complex night sky, and it's a great way of they basically say, okay, well, I'm here, I can see the sky, I can see this constellation, which means I must be roughly there, so I can apply that to sail somewhere, right? So that's the constellation bit. The bit on the top, though, is where things become really interesting. Like, and this is where the third level order of thinking is essentially where you want to be when you get into university. If you're thinking about getting a PhD, you should be able to actually make something that is novel in terms of like the scientific canon. Right. So that is, but there's other versions of that too. Like if you start working for a company and you want to become an engineer, the whole point is that you eventually can start doing things like, thinking outside of the box or thinking logically along a certain pathway until you can create something new, right? So that's where we want them to be. So where we see this difficulty with a lot of kids here, like in high school, it's very rare for them to actually reach the self-actualization stage. Is that like kids get a little bit stuck there, right? So again, we use projects in this case to help them get unstuck in this. So again, this is analyze and apply. So this is about how do you do that? And this is what we call metacognition, right? So the idea is we'd have to do metacognition. Metacognition is the art of learning how to study. There's lots of misconceptions about what that means, because some people think, so, well, you just have to sit still and focus. And for some kids, that is an element to it. But there's a lot of new techniques that you could use, like from neuroscience specifically, to neurolinguistic programming, memorization techniques, meditation techniques. There's funny enough, a lot of work that I do with the kids that are really struggling right now is about how to manage their at-home situation. Like, so when I'm coaching a bunch of A-level students, they're literally having their exams as we speak. Like today was their first ones. And for some of them, even with 1 week to go, the most important thing to talk about was how to manage the emotional distress that the at-home situation creates for them. And the idea being is that like you cannot really work on anything if you're emotionally in distress, which means that metacognition is about recognizing when that happens, what your triggers are, how to manage those emotions down, how to park things for later, how to protect your boundaries when it comes to studying or getting time to center and so on. And basically apply the last few weeks before an exam in the most productive way. And the one example, a very good example of this, in like Harvard, for example, before exams happen, they get 1 week off. I believe it's even 2 weeks. And in that 1 or 2 weeks, they are sort of expected not to study anything new. They're encouraged to walk around, to loiter, to get bored, because that state of being and then thinking about the stuff that is happening allows their brain to sort of build almost these sagas, as I call it, because that's kind of the last stage here. Sagas. Like if you look at like traditional stories, they often were around like a constellation. This would be a god, and then they would have done this, and this is how the Greeks sort of and the Vikings, and I believe like even in Chinese folklore, there's quite a lot of stuff around stories and sagas around. And when we listen to stories, we remember stuff much easier. Right, so it's a great memorization tool. There's a reason why before we could write stuff down, the most important tradition in order to get any kind of values and any kind of learning across was to tell these intricate stories around the campfire. And we don't really use that particular thing. But what is really nice is that like projects are like little stories, because you start with an idea, you discuss it, you think about what that means, then you look at like, okay, where can I apply it? What stuff do I need to learn? How do I then do a little test? Like, what does the test do? Like, so when we have kids that basically really engrossed in the project, they can really tell from beginning to end what the stages were and where they were struggling. And if the project is related to something like biology, for example, they that like one of the girls that we were working with, what is the biology chemistry? I guess it was kind of in both biochemistry, I guess, because she made organic plastic. And like that took her quite a while to get right, and that basically involves both learning like what kind of ratios she needed for particular glycerin and particular starches, but also like how to work with fire, how to get that all right, how to apply it. Like, but she can probably tell me like 1.5 years after that she did this, what she's learned from that, and that is really, really important. So this, when we look at kids that are struggling here, a lot of the projects are about things that are for us are about like, can we help them learn how to maintain? So when you do a project and it's hard and you're likely to not succeed, a lot of our kids are sort of conditioned to give up. They go, oh, here's a project that I'm not going to complete. I'm going to let it go. And this is where we start making most of our efforts and our supports happen with the kids. This is really where we turn almost like into a mentor. And a lot of this stuff that we do is almost like Mr. Miyagi kind of things, where we let them see the consequences of some of the actions that they run into. Because if you decide to procrastinate, or to become too perfectionistic in something, or go off track in your planning, things get really, really tough. And that is that metacognition bit that we work on with them. Now, the final bit here, where normally people don't get stuck here because you're at the top of the pyramid. But when we get gifted kids here, what we see is really a success. And because when you self-actualize and you're doing it from a place of strength, like particularly because you've built up confidence and so on, it is really fun. This is when learning becomes really interesting. And this is actually that holy grail that everybody looks at, because this self-actualization bit is where you see kids really, really, really learn things. And you've seen this probably before with a lot of your kids that are playing computer games. Right? Some of them get into computer games, and like Minecraft is an amazing, like example of this. That's a really difficult game to play for a lot of people. There's so much detail, there's so many building blocks, and I mean, there's been attempts to turn it into an educational tool. I don't know if that really works. Like, one of the things that I find as you can see all the board games behind me, is that like a lot of educators think that like, oh, if I just turn everything in just a game, like then it's easy to learn. But the irony is, when some of these games are just math that pretend to be a game, it's different to making a game that uses really, really difficult math, for example. And the beauty of really good game design, and that's where we as teachers should basically need to go to, is that like, can the math or can the learning be almost invisible underneath a layer of something that we really want to do, right? So how do you do that? And this is where projects are really fun, because sometimes we get parents that say, oh, I have a kid and he's struggling with Bahasa. And whatever we do, it just doesn't work. And then the question becomes, all right, what could we do that incorporates Bahasa in a meaningful way so that the kids want to do the actual work? And then the Bahasa itself becomes not an obstacle, but like something fun to achieve. And that can be different from different kids. Like for some of them, it could be because they're really interested in history. Like just asking them, so, oh, what is the Malaysian language? Like, where did it migrate from? What are the differences in different kinds of dialects? Like, what words are different? Like, if somebody speaks it from Indonesia versus somebody from mainland Malaysia, what differences do you see? And just that research and thinking about, oh, okay, what does that mean? I have to look up all these different words. What do they mean? I have to translate them so that people understand them. Maybe I have to make like a little presentation about it. That is so much more in depth than they probably would have gone into with normal Malay, and they need to probably read the Malay words that they would need to read in class to be able to do this. This is really fun between, like, unfortunately a little bit harder here in Malaysia, but if you are Dutch and the connection with English is really big. So like the eras of time when like countries like sort of ruled each other and where then words come from are a great way for us to help kids learn French, learn German, learn English in a way that they don't even realize that they're learning it. So that is really strong. Now it gets even stronger if they start looking for opportunities like this in the projects that they work on, right? And that is again like the idea. Although like what we tend to see is we work with parents, and sometimes we get kids from different time frames in which we've been working with them. So I've got some kids we've been working with for 4 years. We have some kids who just started last term, and they come in and they look at it and they go like, well, why is there such a big difference? Like, how come this child is doing so much more? And then they don't realize that that child maybe has done like 4 or 5 projects already, right? So and my child is doing their first one. So that idea of like I'm doing something really difficult above my level of comfort, and now I have to face the music, because when they make wrong decisions on that, oof, like things can go off the rails pretty quickly. Really good example of that is like the bridge project we're doing in one of our classes right now, where the kids were basically given, like the only challenge that they gave is that we have a 1 meter bridge to build for like, and what we're going to do is we're going to try and see who can build the strongest bridge by putting weights on it. And then here's a 50 ringgit budget, figure it out. Now, this particular group, because it's the first project that they do with us, they've been like, okay, like we've put some satay sticks and some rubber bands there, and we told them this is technically the cost that you can have, like 50 ringgit, and this is what the cost of a rubber band is, or some sticks, and they just stay within that framework. But we've had groups that went through the same challenge after done a few projects, and they just went, all right, we have 50 ringgit. Can we order stuff online? Like, can we find better materials than what we have here? And we said, sure, no problem at all. But you have to, if you order stuff, the 50 ringgit, it gets spent. Like, what is your plan? Like, what kind of bridge are you building? And they would draw it all out. And they made a suspension bridge. And they actually managed to build a bridge that was almost 3 meters long and held, oh God, like 20, 30 kgs easily, because they really ordered the right kind of materials. And that's the kind of a difference. Like, it's the same group of kids and like similar groups of kids. One has been with us for quite a while and the other one hasn't, right? So like we want to get kids to that level. And as they progress, like when we get to the self-actualization stage in our project work, the aim is to try and use stuff that we can really use in portfolio work. And that means, how applicable is it in real life? Now, one of the girls that we're working with right now is trying to figure out if you could build a battery out of a superconductor at room temperature. So that is a tough one. Okay, so and this is a PhD level amount of work. Like if she can even get close to something useful in this, she can probably work in any university she wants. But this is a project that she decided to start on her own. In a similar fashion, another boy in year 11 right now, who was like really closed off, like struggling with coming up with this idea. Once he realized, oh, this is what the project is for, and this is what I can do, he's now organizing a hackathon with four schools involved, and he's got a bank already interested to sort of help support them. And this is a boy that barely wanted to talk in his class before, right? So these projects can go from these kind of small, almost meaningless things to them, because they're very scared to make these decisions, to like really important stuff. So that is the project-based thing here. And I want to make a little bit of a comparison, because maybe some of you have heard of the IB schools, International Baccalaureate schools, which are a really strong proponent on project-based learning. And I'll be honest, like there a lot of their curriculum I really, really like. There's a lot of focus on letting the kids basically learn things through this kind of interactive way, and it's really great. But there's still a little bit of a caveat. It's still not fully like you have all the choice that you want kind of thing. And that is a little bit different from what we do in Passend, right? So if you are a parent that is in an IB school with us, what you'll notice is that like our projects tend to be like even more open-ended. And then one of the things that we never do, we never make a decision for a child, right? So because the learning how to make a decision is hard, right? So that is the IB stuff. So in the pursuit of happiness, as I said, like the aim of any of our projects is to help kids get happy first, right? And that means that like they need to learn that failing at something is actually fun. It's because if you fail at something that was really difficult, and you are okay with that, like oof, the world opens up, right? And that is the biggest challenge that I have to help a lot of the parents with. And I've got a question here from a parent, specifically like about a girl that is not willing to do her homework, right? So so this comes in very nicely to where I think where project-based learning is so much more important than just this kind of homework. So first of all, we have an 8-year-old girl. She's getting some homework, and the parents saw some mistakes in that homework, and then she didn't want to review those mistakes. And then eventually that they created a little bit of a situation. It was like, okay, back and forth, and then she said, "Oh, I'll do it on Friday." So she basically kicked the can down the road, um, but basically kept saying, "I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine." And then, well, like essentially by the time it was Friday, when the time this question was asked, she still refuses to check her math, right? And that means, like I'm fine, but like her what she said was, I'm doing my homework better than any of my friends in class, so it doesn't really make a difference now. So the question is, are the parents so they managed to eventually get it to do it, which I assume happened after quite a little bit of a fight back and forth. But then, like, are we doing the right thing? That's the question from the parent. And this is why project-based learning is so great. If this would be a project that she cared about, and her calculations would be off, and it would be pertaining a bridge, for example, the bridge would collapse if she makes a mistake, right? So you would either be short some sticks, or you'll be overcompensating for a certain downforce or undercompensating for it, whatever it is. Like if you make any kind of mathematical errors in a bridge building project, it will directly impact the actual output of the bridge. And in those situations, because like if you look at, like, I don't know this particular girl because she's really strong in math. She basically goes, like, if you were to give her that particular problem and the bridge would collapse, she would be upset with it. And then if you could say, oh, why don't we do it again? Right? Like what led to that mistake? There is now an actual imprinted reason why doing and rechecking your work is important, because it has a direct consequence. What is probably likely the case here, knowing that this girl goes to an international school, is that there's actually very little consequence to her having it wrong. No, and because they won't get like a big grade. Maybe she's actually kind of bored with this particular thing, so she goes like, yeah, like what's the point? It's just like busy work. It's very likely that she thinks this is just busy work. So that is one of the main reasons why project-based learning is so good. So what you could ask with this girl is like, okay, so what is the point here? Is the point to finish the homework, or is the point for her to learn to be better at math? Now, I don't know what kind of math work this is, but what could you do with the mistakes that she made and say, okay, I've seen these mistakes. And you don't even have to confront her on that straight away, because technically that's her teacher's job to do that, right? And at 8 years old, you can trust me on this, the grades here don't matter that much. To be honest, if she would go back and she would get and if she would get a grade and it's not as high as she thought it would be, there's probably a better chance that she would go, I'm upset, I'm going to do it better next time. You could also figure out, okay, well, if this is arithmetic or multiplications or something more complex, what kind of a project could we do at home that needs her to do these kind of calculations, that would be more fun, right? And then play that, right? If the work she's doing is just repetition, is there a board game you can play that actually would do this, right? So like project-based learning and problem-based learning are much more important than that. And let me see if I can actually see a game here, if I can find it. There's a game called Machikoro, which is, yeah, here it is. This is an amazing game. Um, just to give you an idea of what kind of things you could do. So Machikoro is a game where you're a mayor of a town, and what you have to do is you start off with a little bit of money, and then you have these special buildings that basically you buy. So bakeries, everything you can find in the town, like little things like a hamburger stand, or as I said, a bakery and a few other things. Like there's lots of things that you could potentially get. There's wheat fields and you name it. The way that this game works is that every round, everybody rolls a normal six-sided die, which I have here, right? And whenever the actual die lands on a number that you have, you get amount of money. So, for example, if I have this particular card, it's called a wheat field. It says on anybody's turn, if somebody rolls a one, you get 1 coin. Now, if you have 5 of them, if somebody rolls a die, you'll get 5 coins. So there's 5 times 1's multiplication. But the game gets more and more complex. There's games that say something if you have more than 20 coins, and this gets done hand in half, your coins rounded up to somebody else. So there's lots of complex cards in there, and all of it is like a form of multiplication, arithmetic, and the consequence of not doing it right means that you either get less money and you lose the game, right? So like with an 8-year-old, playing a game like this for a half hour will probably get her to practice her math more intensely, more enjoyably, like for you as well, and you get what you want, right? So that is what I would say. Like, I'm on the right track. It's like, what do you want her to do? That's the first question I would ask. Do you want her to get better at math, or do you want her to get high grades in primary? And if she gets, like, it could well be, right, that she gets an A, but she still hasn't learned anything about like owning up to her own mistakes. Now multiply that to when she's maybe 16, 17, and all of a sudden the exams come up, then there'll be a lot more challenges to deal with, right? So that is my advice in this. Like what is the real goal? Ms. Fatia said something very interesting, like today when we were talking about like how a lot of stuff in school has changed. A lot of parents get their grades nowadays directly via email. So this is an email, and that's a grade list, and then that's it, right? Like I now know the kids' grades, and there's like some schools send half-term grades, and it's like you can see exactly what kind of scores they have. Traditionally, grades used to be collected by the teacher, and then at the end of a year or a term, the kids would have to take their grades to the parents, right? So the kids would talk to the teacher getting their grades, and then they would have to talk to the parents about it and then bring it back. What happens now with a lot of teachers is that the grades go directly to the parents email the teachers directly, and the kid doesn't get spoken to at all, right? So like, who is the grade for? For the teacher and the parents, or is it for the kid? And what can we do as parents and educators to involve the kids with this particular decision? Because if the kids get like a grade that they didn't like, they can ask the teacher like, "Oh, why is that? What can I do?" Right? But if that sort of a lot of, unfortunately, like the kind of situation where a lot of schools is that because the parents and the teachers talk directly to each other, they come up with strategies to think about, oh, we need to do this more and more and more, and the one that has to do all that stuff that is never involved. So again, where's the agency? Where's the responsibility? And then basically, how can you be a little bit more creative about what you really want once you establish what is your goal, what you want to achieve, and then you can probably trust that they will be better at the math than they were if they just did a little bit of homework. Is there any other questions from any of you about this topic, anything not clear, I would love to elaborate a bit more. Please ask them live if you wish, or you can put them in the chat for that matter. Um, Let me see. I have one question here. It's like, my child has been rejecting school on and off since he was 9. How can I help him? And why do they reject school at this age? Uh, I mean, quite frankly, it's because a lot of stuff in school is just not fun. Now, this particular to them, to a lot of gifted kids, right? So it means that they're bored, they're understimulated. Sometimes, like in the situation of this particular boy, I know that there's a little bit of a challenge around masking emotions. Right, so there's been a few things happening in the school, specifically towards with other kids, where you can see he's learned how to mask his actual emotions really well, and he understands how normal schools is very specific rhythm. So he knows how to deal with any of these things. And in our classes, particularly, we do a lot of different things. Like projects are not always the same. Sometimes they're 2 weeks, sometimes they're 6 weeks. They choose what they need to do. If a child says, "I want an extra week," they'll get it. Right? They, like, as long as they can actually tell us why. If it's because it's extension, if they say, "Yeah, it's because I procrastinated and I want to do better," then that's good learning. And say, okay, owning up to your mistakes, like in terms of procrastination, is a great habit to have. So you can say, I need help with this, I need a little bit of extra time, and this is what I'm going to do not to let it happen again. Right? There's lots of ways that you can help with this. And what I know with this boy in particular is the project that he's doing right now with us, he likes enough to still want to come, but not and then take the social challenges that he's running into, like as something, okay, I'll deal with it. Like what he said is like, I'll deal with it. So it's an element of like first helping the school potentially make him do a little bit more interesting things. In case of kids like this, where he's like, okay, I'm too worried, I'm too concerned. There is a little bit of positive discipline in this, where like he has to go to school. That's not a choice that either you as a parent or he as a child gets by law, right? But like how you have that interaction is one, and that could be as simple as, right, I'm going to either let you walk in to the school on your own, or I'm going to carry you inside. Either one of which I'm fine with. They'll most of the times they'll choose, I will walk inside myself. That is like to overcome that barrier so that they can get used to it. However, once they then are inside and they're still not having that particular kind of the enjoyment, a big part of like telling him in advance what he can expect is really, really important. Right, so this is what to expect. This might be different. This is that particular variance that we might see. I've got a very good example of exactly the same kind of challenge with a boy who seems like he actually enjoys school a lot, goes to school, no problem whatsoever. When we go on a trip, he's completely like, okay, I don't know what to do. And this particular boy didn't sign up to one of our trips, but he showed up at the day that we were going to for a trip, and he was expecting it to be a normal class. And there was a spot free, so and his mom had already driven off, so he had sort of no choice, right? So I gave him a choice, and I said, like, well, your mom can pick you up at 12 or at 2 when the trip is finished, but you have no choice in whether you come on the trip or not, because I can't leave you here in the center. There's a big bus, we have to go. But I'm here to help you with that. What can we do? And he said, okay, I'll come and I'll decide when we're there whether it's like 12 or 2. And he held up until 12 really well, and he participated really well. And at 12 he came back. It's a lot. Like, it's really difficult for me. I need to go home. Then I said, that you can go. He says, yeah, but it's 12 now. I said, yeah, but if you tell me at 12, I cannot do anything. So your mom's probably going to take a half hour. Which he said, okay, I'm fine with. Again, a difficult situation for him. When his mom came, in the end, he didn't leave until the whole thing was done, right? So a little bit of like, okay, how far can we push this? Because that's like about like, okay, can I get used to that fear, that frustration in a way? But then what we have to not forget is that with these kids, we have to then also reward them for when they try and attempt it, right? So but this particular boy, and I saw him today. I said, actually, I'm really proud of the fact that you're here and you're giving your all. And then he said, yeah, I really like this particular project. I really want to get this done, right? And then we had a great conversation about like what that would look like and what kind of things he would need to get used to enjoy school more. He said something very sad, like in a way. He said like, yeah, but like I know I'm fine because I think school is going to be fun when I go to university, because that was what my mom said. School's going to be fine when I go to university, and I asked him, say, well, why would you be okay with school not being fun and nice for the next 10 years? Then he said, and then he looked and he said, not really sure, right? So when I asked him again, then okay, do you want some help with that? He said, oh, maybe I would, right? So um, there might be a little bit of like a feeling of I'm not feeling fully safe, but again, because their choice in the project and the things that they did pushed them over the line to get there, and that's why project-based learning at home, but also in the school, is so important. I think that's it. I can't really see the chat. Like Ms. Fatia, if there's somebody in the chat that has a question, please let me know. If not, I'm gonna wrap it up for tonight because it's been an hour. I think I've had you as a captivated audience long enough. So um, I think I want to thank you all for you being here. If there's any more questions like the ones we just handled, please send them in the questionnaire next week, and then I would love to take this further from there. All right.